So we'll go ahead and get started then. We have some people trickling in online. But thanks for joining us here in person. We have PhD student Qingyu Wang, who works with Dr. Crowell, here giving us another update on her PhD progress. And today she'll be updating us on Bayesian optimization on Noah-Multiparameter optimization. So thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. So I'm Qingyu. I'm a third-year PhD student. I'm presenting part of my PhD topic, and it is halfway, like it's not finished yet. So I would like to listen to your suggestions and comments. And this work is about Noah-Multiparameter optimizations and SGP, and we use a method called Bayesian optimization. And this work is mentored by my advisor, Dr. Crowell, and my committee chair, Dr. Patrick Klein. And I really appreciate their help. So let's start with the evolution of some land surface models. So we know that atmosphere processes are really complex, and it's really hard for us to totally understand those processes. So the scientists made a lot of effort to build a very important tool, which is land surface model, to help us to understand, project, and predict the dynamics of land surfaces. So starting from the 1970s, scientists started to study the surface energy fluxes, and they also later on they also added plant physiologies like stomatal resistance and also some soil properties into the land surface models. And later on, they also add more and more complex processes into the model to make the model more sophisticated. So under the global warming situation, the land-atmosphere interactions are more and more playing a very important role in the Earth system because it is tightly related to the carbon fluxes, which is the main component in the greenhouse gases. However, even though they made a lot of efforts in developing and using the land surface models, there are still a lot of challenges. For example, we know the land surface processes are really complicated, so it is really hard for us to understand those complexity. And ideally, we would prefer a land which is like homogeneous. It is really easy for science, but unfortunately, in reality, the land surface are always like have some heterogeneity and have a lot of dimensions to consider. So that also create a challenge for us. And we know there are some parameters that quantifies or describe the properties, for example, the soil and plant, for example, the canopy size and how tall the vegetations are, and like how much water a cubic soil can contain. Like those characteristics are partly described by the quantity of those parameters. So the parameter is also really important for us to give a better estimation to help our models more accurate. And again, so even though scientists made a lot of efforts, there are always some errors and biases in land surface models. And those biases are mainly contributed from three primary components. The first one is imperfect model structures. We have a lot of parameterization schemes. For example, in WRF model, we have a lot of options, but none of them are 100% perfect. So it is really hard to generate a perfect model to simulate everything in the atmosphere. And also we have some like meteorological forcing data, for example, a pressure and potential temperature, wind speed at different levels. And for the model, we also need initial conditions and also boundary conditions. So those data are made from the reanalysis data or some observations for like bloom soundings. But Also, the data can also have some uncertainties that we may need to apply some filters or some quality control onto those data to make them more accurate. But they still have some incorrect inputs that can drive the models into an imperfect way. And another component is inappropriate model parameter values. So this contains a lot of things. It is, for example, the soil, again, and the vegetation. And a lot of aspects can be explained by the parameters. So in a model, usually they contain like tens or like less than 100 or even more than 100 parameter values. And it is those parameter values are really important because usually they have some specific values for a specific kind of soil or kind of vegetation, and it quantify a lot of characteristics of them. So we need better parameter values to describe those processes. But those parameters always present the main physics like in a grid cell. But sometimes the grid cell is too coarse and cannot represent a small area like a little cropland. So, and also there are some heterogeneities in the soil and a lot of very complex conditions. So we need, for some locations, we may want like more appropriate parameters to make our local simulations better. And the second way seems to me it is maybe it's easier to generate a perfect model structure, and also um, we can not do a lot of things to adjust to make the perfect meteorological forecasting data. So the second, I think it is feasible way to improve our models. So for our motivation, we would like to optimize the surface energy fluxes, for example, sensible heat flux, latent heat flux, and also we can optimize near surface atmospheric state variables, including 2-meter air temperature in the water and the specific humidity and wind speed by optimizing sensitive parameters in a simple model. So the reason we are using a simple model because the optimization processes need a lot of iterations to optimize the parameters. And a simple model will help us reduce the computational cost and save our time. And we want to optimize sensitive parameters that adjusted to be like in a physical range or a physical reasonable value at the specific location and time. So the model I'm going to use is Noah-MP. It is the Noah land surface model with multi-parameterization options. So this option, multiple options can provide us some opportunities to select the one more applicable to other cases. For example, like some options can be more applicable to a cold area when there snows a lot. But if we want to apply those land surface model to a like growing season in SGP, we might want other options, which is like more applicable to our case. And the Noah-MP, like it contains the main processes in the land atmosphere exchange. For example, the canopy, water evaporation, transpiration, and some precipitation, and some soil. It also includes moisture flux and heat flux, and also the surface runoff, and also infiltration to lower levels of soil. So it is just a brief diagram to illustrating the main processes in the Noah-MP. And for my project, I'm actually using a very simplified WRF with the Noah-MP land surface model. So this WRF is only an ideal single column with spatial resolution 4 kilometers times 4 kilometers. And it is from the ground to the top of, not top of the atmosphere, but like 100 Pascal almost. And we use the Fulton data from Era 5 reanalysis, and it is like fitting into the model every 6 hours, and we have 25 layers of the Fulton data. Well, so the Era 5 reanalysis data have like 0.25 degrees. We think it is maybe too big on this cropland, so we use more accurate soil moisture and temperature observed from the eddy covariance tower in the AmeriFlux network, so which is SGP. And other WRF parameterization schemes, it is commonly used. For example, the long wave radiation is RTM, and also PBL is YSU. So all of them are not really special ones. We are using very common ones. And also, the table at right-hand side is the options in the Noah-MP. So most of them are also the default or the widely used ones. So, for example, the stormwater resistance is called like BUL, which is really commonly used now. And all of the others are like default ones. So we don't want to use very special cases to simulate this area. And the site we use is USARM. And this is a complicated managed site. So in 1 year, they have like different, I think they have like different vegetations. For example, in the spring, in this year, they have rotations. And in this year, in 2016, they planted alfalfa, which is the food of the animals. And it can be, the hay can be like baled multiple times. They also apply some fertilizer and sometimes irrigation. So there are some complicated management there that result in the like discontinued, at least not quite continuous NEE or net ecosystem exchange at the station. So we want to test the parameters when the canopy or the vegetations are really active. So we are using the observations in April and May, these 2 months. It looks like continuously, plants are continuously active in these 2 months. Also, there are not a lot of rain in this year in these 2 months. So this is a site. And the method I mentioned in the title, it is Bayesian optimization. So one biggest advantage of this method, it is the speed. So compared to other methods like Markov chain, Monte Carlo, you have to have like 10 to 6 iterations to receive the convergence. And it means like even using the single column WRF, which runs like for 10 days, the WRF can run for 2 to 3 minutes. So if I have to have like 10 to 6 iterations, it can run for like a couple years. I don't want to wait for a couple years to an optimal like parameters. So this is a good opportunity. This is a good substitution. That the basic idea of this optimization method is I need to find the parameters that makes a cost function fx, the cost function fx, the minimum. So I need to find the x-opt, which is a parameter, optimized parameter that can result in my case, the fx, it is a mismatch between the observations and the simulations. So I would like to find the parameters like makes a mismatch between the observations and simulations smallest. So I would optimize 10 continuous sunny days because I don't think like 2 short days are representative. Like I don't think 2 to 3 days is providing enough information, and too long, it will consume a lot of time. So I decided to use like 10 continuous days, and it should not rain too much. And also the mismatch between the observation and simulations considers the sensible heat flux, latent heat flux, because these two are tightly related to the vegetation activities. So when there are a lot of vegetation in the summer and very strong transpiration and evaporation, latent heat flux should be very large. So these two are really sensitive to like vegetation and the soil moistures. And T2, Q2, which is a 2-meter air temperature, 2-meter specific humidity, and wind speed at 10 wind speed at 10 meters, which are the outputs from the WRF. And these are also can be related to the land surface interactions, and would like to optimize the three also. And so the goal of this cost function is to find the parameters that makes the mismatch between the observations and simulations smallest. And if it is like doing a very good way, we can consider if the parameters can also benefit longer time scale. So, but there are some requirements for this Bayesian optimization methods. So the important one is the dimensions or the numbers of the parameters should be less than 20. And actually, the number can be less. It is suggested to use like less than 10 dimensions. And the fx, the cost function, should be continuous, and also should not have gradients. And the fx or the cost function should be a black box question. So we don't know what is inside. We have inputs and outputs, but we don't know what is working in the black box. And the typical application of the Bayesian optimization is a hyperparameter optimization. So this is what are needed. And I gave some basic processes in Bayesian optimization. So the basic idea is I have to generate some of the initial condition or initial points to find what the cost function looks like in the first guess. And then I can have like a couple hundreds of iterations to like they have 2 dots there. I can have a couple hundred dots there. The more dots I have, the more exact shape of the cost function can be revealed to us. And like in their example, it is a very simple one-dimensional example. So they have 2 points or 2 observations or 2 iterations in my case, and they assume these 2 observations does not have any noises. So at these 2 points, we can find the shade or the uncertainty of this mean, which the dashed line or the fx. So the uncertainty of the fx is 0 at these 2 points. But actually, like we have the flux data which have some noises, so it cannot always be 0 at these 2 points in our cases. And in every iteration, we will have results from the acquisition function. So the acquisition function is used to give us a hint, like next point, where we do want to optimize at next point. So once decided which point we are going, and then we do the measure there, and like with more and more points, we can have like the uncertainty shrinks and shrinks. So this is a basic idea of the Bayesian optimization. And we have a lot of parameters. What parameters we want to optimize? So we have to make our choices. There are in total, so we have a lot of options in the Noah-MP, and the combinations of these options can be like thousands of options combinations. But once the default options we choose, we have 42 active parameters. So those parameters can affect radiation, like vegetation, soil, and carbon and so on, and a lot of interactions. So we need to apply a sensitivity analysis on these 42 parameters to select the most sensitive ones to optimize, because our Bayesian optimization does not allow like 42 parameters. So finally, we find 6 most sensitive parameters, and we will compute, like we will optimize these 6 parameters to make our simulations for latent heat flux, sensible heat flux, T2, Q2, and wind speed closest to the observations. And we, like the selected parameters are given in this table. Like for example, so all of those 6 parameters are soil parameters. So that means like the soil property is really important in the land atmosphere interactions. So for example, the first one, the sea soil, which is volumetric soil heat capacity. And we know the soil heat capacity can change with how much water it can contain. It contains, like if it contains more water, the soil heat capacity can change to be bigger values. And all of those other parameters are also adjustable, depend on like water, the soil characteristics. And another example, like SMC max, the bottom ones, which is a porosity, or we can say it is like in the cubic water, how much cubic soil, how much water the soil can contain. So it also depends on the soil properties. And the last one, the wilting point soil moisture, it is like the minimum soil moisture. And if we have less soil moisture than that point, the vegetation cannot absorb water from the soil again. So this is also very important soil property. Okay, so then we apply the Bayesian optimization on the 6 parameters, and we have results. So if we look at the figures at right-hand side, the shade are like what I showed before. It is the green dashed line is the mean value of those cost functions. So we have 6 dimensions. I cannot plot the figures with 6 dimensions. So I did the projection onto one dimension. So it is cost function values versus one parameter for each figure. And those shades are the uncertainty of the mean function or the mean cost function. And I have a lot of colorful scatters, which means the order of my iterations. So I have 300 iterations from very beginning. I marked with blue color, and later on they will turn to green and yellow and red. So for example, in the SMC max, for example, it is like started to explore this cost function in the middle, like around 0.5, and it tries to explore like here a boundary, upper boundary, and then it thinks there are maybe I can explore some points at here, and maybe their optimal should be around here. So there are some red colors around there, around 0.445. So I marked also the optimal or the final results, the best points, best parameters with the star. So compared to original default values, some of them can be really different, like the sea soil as expected. For a vegetated area, the soil can be like wet than the common ones. So the heat capacity can be a little bit bigger than the default values. And some of them are slightly changed for, like example, the SMC max and the wilting point. And well, so, and how those changes in the soil, those parameters can change our simulations of the 5 observations, like sensible heat flux, latent heat flux. Well, so in the original simulations, the sensible heat flux in this 10 days, like from the beginning of April in 2016, it is like heavily underestimated, which is a blue line, blue solid line, and the dots and scatters, black scatters are the observations from the AmeriFlux eddy covariance tower. And these red lines are the optimized simulations with optimized parameters. So we see in the original simulations, our sensible heat flux is underestimated. However, the latent heat flux is overestimated. So, and what the optimizer parameter do is, it is adjusting the sensible heat flux, getting closer to the observations, also reduces the simulations of the latent heat flux. And also, I only give Q2, which is the specific humidity at 2 meters, and also other two, wind speed and temperature is also improved, but it's not dramatically at like this rate. So the Q2 is also reduced, like getting closer to the observations. So from the histogram plot and one-to-one plot, we see like the red, which is a mismatch between the observations and the simulations, is more centered around 0, which means our the simulations with optimized parameter is generating more, so better simulations compared to the observations. So we expect those parameters can also benefit at longer time. So what it will look like. So this is like the whole 2 months in 2016 from April to May. So so what the parameter is generally doing is it also reduces the sensible, or it increases the sensible heat flux and lower down the latent heat flux. If we look at the histogram, it is not like as good as the previous like 10-day mismatches, but also we can see that generally the red bars are like more centered near 0, which indicates our optimized simulations is like better than the original simulations. So, and then in surprising finding is that even though we did not include the soil moisture in the cost function, so we are not optimizing the soil moisture, but once we have the optimized parameter, it also improved the simulation for the soil moisture. So this is the first layer of soil moisture, like the top layer. And so the histogram suggests like the mismatch of the optimized ones is also centered near 0. So this is like quite a good news for me. And however, I applied those similar methods to other locations, like another cropland, which is a maizeland in Nebraska, and it is not as good as one. So my parameter is not optimizing the whole growing season. And so it is suggesting like maybe this method, those set of parameters can only apply to this location. Maybe I need to do another optimization at other locations. So it is really like only applicable to one case, maybe only at a specific time. And so it indicates the parameters can also change and also evolve like with time. Now, in summary, these 6 parameters are optimized using the Bayesian optimization in a single column WRF with Noah-MP. And optimize the parameters helps improve the simulation of sensible heat flux, latent heat flux, T2, Q2, and wind speed. And also it helps other simulations like soil moisture, like I showed in the last slide. And also the soil moisture is not included in the cost function, but my parameter optimizer parameter also helps the simulation of soil moisture. So, but this set of optimizer parameters are not necessarily applicable to other locations and with similar land covers. And in the future, we need to find some physical support, like if there are those parameters are reasonable for this location, and we need to find like theoretical support for those values. And maybe we can apply this to other similar land covers, even though they have some differences. We can try to compare if they have similarities and differences, and to find why it is different or why it is very similar. And we can probably apply this method to a more complex land surface, since we are now using single column model and assume in this column the land surface is kind of homogeneous. So we can try to apply this method to a more complex surface. So this is what I have. I can take questions and comments.
I'm going to open up questions to online. While we wait, and questions are also to the room. I will ask you one now. I was just wondering, are there higher order interactions between some of those kind of parameters that are related to each other?
That's a good question. Yes. So this is one limitation of this method, and they cannot consider the dependence of this. For example, the SMC max and the wilting point, they should be related to each other. But we are not doing it as we are trying to find a reasonable range, like upper bound and lower bound, and try to find the random points between these ranges. But yeah, you're right, but they can be dependent, but we are not considering that.
Thank you.
Thank you all.